Hey, welcome to my channel where I talk about dolls, and that's literally it. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the stigmas behind doll collecting and sort of juxtapose them against why dolls actually matter. As the video progresses, I'm probably going to drop the stigma portion of the discussion and just talk about how and why collecting dolls is so amazing. I'll try to make the points as generic as possible, but sometimes they may come from a bit more of a male perspective, just because I'm a male collector. And the reason I wanted to do this video is because oftentimes people comment on my videos that either they wish they could be as unapologetic about doll collecting as I am, or watching my videos and seeing me be unapologetic about doll collecting has helped them become a little bit more comfortable in their collecting, and sometimes even putting up their displays because they've been inspired by what I go through as a collector, because that's the most important part to me. I'll try to keep the conversation in cohesive topics that I can timestamp, and then that way you can navigate around if there are certain points you're only interested in or certain points you're more interested in. The first topic I'm going to talk about is probably the most obvious one, and that's embarrassment around adult collecting. And I think from women, from what I'm gathering from comments, some adult females seem to go through the issue of thinking that doll collecting is seen as childish or embarrassing in some way, and other reasons, but I'm just going to talk about the childish one at first. And the reason I'm kind of cheating at being not ashamed of that as an adult is because as a kid, I was a boy collector. So I already had to fight against the shame and getting made fun of or being judged for being different about liking dolls. Whereas females didn't go through that shame as a kid. So it's possible, in my opinion, that as an adult, they're learning how to sort of navigate not being embarrassed about something that brings them so much joy. But I already went through all that. So my skin was thickened a lot when I was a kid. And I do think as a kid, you're a bit more resilient about stuff like that. So as an adult, I just think, please, if all the kids in the playground surrounding me, teasing me, making fun of me, and always questioning why I liked the things I like, if that didn't bother me, if they couldn't get through my thick skull, then I really think as an adult, I have a little bit of an edge on any other adults who get into collecting. And that the same thing could be said about any boys who were ashamed to collect. And I'm not trying to shame anybody at all, but I'm saying if you as a kid, boy, like as a boy kid, if you had a problem collecting dolls, it's obviously still going to ring out possibly as an adult as well. But I find throughout everything I've collected, most of the people who've communicated that they've had trouble adjusting to collecting or showing how proud they are of collecting, it's usually women, and I think that is probably why, because most of us who are men collectors, we already fortified ourselves as kids. But a big reason I've never really worried about being different is because there are things that I don't like that the majority of people do. Like, take for example, because I'm talking about boy collecting, being a male collector, is a lot of guys they like sports or were expected to like sports, but that's just something that's never resonated with me, and I've always hated it. And when people tease me about being into dolls and putting up my displays and spending so much time and energy on them, all I can think about are those grown adults. And again, I'm not making fun, but all I can think of is like, I would never paint myself blue and white and go to sit in an arena and scream at the ref making bad calls and their team not getting goals. That's how they have fun. So again, I'm not joy shaming, but I'm just saying, because I always was on the outside of what was expected, I learned at a young age that being different doesn't make one right or wrong. It is literally just that, being different. So anything that made me happy, I realized, oh, I'm lucky that I'm on the outside of this, because I can enjoy my joy knowing that it's mine and not. Sometimes I would look at the kids in my class and be like, do you really like what you're doing, or are you just doing that because you're expected to? And that's a little bit off topic of embarrassment and shame. It's more about just always being happy about collecting dolls and realizing how much I didn't fit in with the norm, and that's okay. We're all different. So my biggest piece of advice outside of just myself existing and showing my love and my joy and putting it on display for everyone to see, and I don't do it for inspiration. I do it because I just really want to talk about my dolls and have a channel, or always have some kind of social media where I'm using that as an outlet to express my joy. But the advice I would give outside of that is not to feel like you have to explain yourself to anyone, because if you have different ideas, you're not going to change each other's minds. They're not going to make you stop liking dolls or whatever it is that you collect that people can judge you for, and you're not going to change their mind into thinking it's okay that you do. And I know that extends beyond doll collecting, because in my life, I don't argue with anybody about anything. If you disagree with me on something, I know yelling at each other is not going to make either one of us change sides. So it's just like, anybody out there who thinks I'm weird or thinks there's something wrong with me collecting dolls, that's fine. You're right, because you think that, and that's right for you. But for me, I disagree. And it's like, that's all that matters. I'm doing this for me and not for anyone else. And that's I mean, I don't come out and say that when I'm just showing my dolls, but that is something I'm hoping I'm always exhibiting. I think a major topic of judgment from non-collectors is when it comes to what we spend on dolls, because non-collectors don't even know until they ask and we tell them, and they're usually pretty shocked when they find out how much like a limited edition doll can go for, of any type of doll. It doesn't matter if it's a normally a play line for kids or if it's directed at adults specifically. We know what the budget, we know how much these things cost, and so when they find out, they could usually raise an eyebrow and just, you know what they're thinking. But the thing to keep in mind with that is all adults spend money. In, I guess I shouldn't say that's an absolute, but most adults spend money. We all have spending habits. Some people enjoy spending their money on trips, or maybe they have a big family and that was their passion, to have lots of kids that they're going to spend a lot of money on raising them. Or some people like designer bags, designer shoes. They spend a lot of money on their clothes. And so anytime I notice that someone is asking me in a sort of critical or judgmental way why I spend so much on dolls, or wow, I didn't know it cost that much. You spend a lot on dolls. I'll kind of look them up and down and be like, oh yeah, how much did your shoes cost? And how much did your last pair of shoes cost before you threw those in the garbage? Because the doll that I just spent $100 on 2 months ago, she's now worth 3 times that. And it's not even to like wipe the smoke off the face. It's just to let them know. It's like there's a different perspective. Like, yeah, I spend a lot on dolls, but dolls, they either retain some kind of value, or oftentimes if you're into collectible dolls, they appreciate in value. And that's another thing non-collectors don't know. And I do love to tell the story about these limited edition Disney dolls and the Frozen characters, Anna and Elsa. When they came out of the Disney store, they were, I'm going by Canadian prices here, they sold for, I think it was about $130 Canadian. And these are just 17-inch dolls. To a non-collector, they just look like large Barbies, and they don't look like they have any value at all. And I remember somebody specifically at work, when I told them about the dolls that I collect, and he literally said, that's such a waste of money. And I said, no, because when I ended up selling those dolls at the peak, those Frozen dolls that cost 130 went for about $2,000 USD on the secondary market. That's not when I sold them, but I didn't let it go like that. And so then the eyebrow raises in a different way, like, oh, this is an investment. And that is how I feel about dolls a lot of time. Like, if you have any kind of entertainment, going to the movies, going out to dinners, you're going to spend money. And the thing with dolls, or any kind of collectible, I should say, to be generic, is that there is some kind of value involved, or over time that can go up in value. And of course, I leave the part of the conversation where that's not always the case. Sometimes you buy something on the secondary market and then it either depreciates in value or it just stays the same. So it's like you're spending the money and you're either going to lose a little bit or you're just going to break even. But regardless, even if it depreciates in value, I just look at it as, and I paid a little bit of rent on that piece. If I had it for 2 years and I spent $200 and I can only sell 150, I'm only paying rent, $50 for 2 years. It's not bad to enjoy something as much as I do. And I'm still getting some money back, unlike that, that sweater that I had to have because it was so cute and it was so expensive, and then I threw it out because I eventually, became threadbare. Dolls aren't like that, provided you take care of them. And I'm someone who's an adult collector, so my stuff is just up on shelves looking pretty all the time, but I can't say that's the same for everyone. But still, there's going to be some kind of value when you're done with it. And as funny as it sounds, sometimes doll collecting and doll budgeting can sort of help you prioritize. And this is going to sound so irresponsible at first, but hear me out. Especially when you're younger, for me, it was when I was younger because I had a much less paying job. But if you want to have this collectible, again, this thing that's going to have some kind of value and over time could appreciate. And let's say, you have to keep in mind, you better be paying your bills. I'm not judging you for not, but I'm saying this is assuming that you're paying your bills, what I'm about to say. But if you're paying your bills and you need to have that collectible that's coming out, and you decide, okay, I'm going to, instead of going out for dinner tonight, or going out for lunch tomorrow at work, I'm going to bring that sandwich. I'm going to pack a sandwich, and that'll save me a little bit of money so that I can afford this doll or this collectible, whatever it is. And on the more extreme side, if you really need to have that collectible, and like you're a college student, let's say, or you're just starting out, you may do something a bit more drastic, like live off of ramen noodles for the next couple weeks while you pay off that doll. But keep in mind, as long as you are getting your bills paid and you are eating, you will have that doll and its value. And I know I sound like the opposite of what I'm trying to do and making collecting sound normal or sane, but it is. I mean, it's still teaching you to prioritize. There are other things in life that you will have to prioritize too. And there's another funny, for me, a personal thing that I did when I was younger. I used to have this really bad habit that was bad for my lungs, and it was very expensive. And at one point, so this was so long ago because it's like I was young when I had that bad habit. It's like I'm trying not to even say it because it was so long ago that it doesn't even feel like a part of my history. But because I had to pay for dolls, dolls that were coming out, they became my priority. So I quit that bad habit in order to fund my doll collecting. So there could even sometimes I would use that as a point for somebody if they're saying that I spend too much on dolls. It's like I used to spend money on worse things than this. Sometimes they were bad for my health, and these are not bad for my health. And that's the other thing. It's like you're not harming anyone. Hopefully you're not harming anyone, especially yourself or your budget. But yeah, that's the thing. Like we all have habits, so this is not a bad one in my opinion. And so to anyone else out there who has had some kind of bad habit they've quit for dolls, please let me know. I don't want to sound like the only Looney Tune up here. And I know I'm not. And I'm not saying I am a Looney Tune for doing this, but I'm saying, you know, that's actually a win-win because it's not only are you quitting a bad habit, now your spending habit goes into something that has an investment. Am I really reaching here? I don't think so. I think this all makes sense. Win-win, right? Quitting bad habits, buying dolls, a good habit. But obviously not everybody is going to, no matter how much you try to justify your habits or anything like that, there are the times, and I'm not going to be really speaking from my personal experience here, but something that is where it can cause a lot of problems is for somebody who's dating, because this may become a little bit of a male perspective, but I'll try to keep it generic. For example, if I've heard this from other doll collectors, because throughout my collecting years, I've collected lots of things and been in lots of collecting communities, and there are always male collectors in every community. And so specifically within the gay community, men can fem shame, like feminine shame, if I'm saying that correctly. So sometimes men dating will have trouble because somebody else will see that they have this habit that they see as either wasteful or, feminine or creepy. I remember there was even a Sex in the City episode where, in my opinion, I think the gay best friend character was supposed to be very dweeby and not a good catch. And even he was on a date in this one episode. He was on a date with somebody who I think he had good chemistry with. I don't really remember the episode; it was a long time ago. And I just remember thinking, wow, beggars really can be choosers. Because he got to this guy's apartment and he saw all these dolls. And I think this is when I didn't have very many dolls. I was younger at the time, but I still had a few dolls. And I just thought, if I was dating and anybody ever had a problem with my dolls, that would be just a really good way to filter people out. And I'm probably speaking from a place of privilege because I've always been in long-term relationships. But I do think that being different in any stretch of the word has always been a good filter for me. So that's why I've never felt bad about being different. And in terms of doll collecting, I've never faced it. Like I've never had anybody at least say to my face that they don't want to date me because of my dolls or my collection. But I mean, I'm on social media too. So I think if anything, people would have been like, oh, wow, you've on my Instagram, like, oh, a lot of people are following your account because of your collection. That's cool. You know what I mean? So different kind of currency, I guess. And I said I was going to try to make things generic. So I think instead of making it just about men seeing men collecting dolls as feminine, it's possible, although I've never heard it, just to make it more generic, include everyone, that maybe a woman collecting dolls dating could be seen as something childish. And therefore, maybe they could feel judged too when they're in a dating situation. But I actually do believe the opposite of, I think, maybe I'm justifying and reaching again, but I honestly believe that being a doll collector or any kind of collector, it's actually a green flag. Hear me out. Because when you're collecting dolls, that means you are happy in your home, you're domestic, you're probably somebody who likes to be home. And even if you like to have a social life too, you like to go out, regardless, all your stuff is at home and that's where you become happy. And so everybody's different with the way they collect, but there's an element of beautifying. So I like to think that most collectors are happy in relationships, and I'm not rubbing it in if you haven't been fortunate enough to find that. But I just think in the circles I've uh, found my way in, that I've generally found people to be very relationship focused and happy at home. So I actually, this is what I would advise guys when I would say, well, first of all, I would say no. If they're like that, they're a jerk and don't even think about twice about it. But if you ever do find that person and there's chemistry, then just let them know. It just means you're domestic, and you know how to prioritize your money because you have to get those dolls. But that comes after bills. Every time I'm talking about that, just keep in mind, it's after you pay your bills. And more into the domestic side, domestication of being a collector is it really does. I even feel, even though I don't want to have kids, I feel like something about collecting really taps into my nurturing side. And just because I'm don't want kids doesn't mean I, don't love my nieces and nephews. And if there's ever a kid around, they're usually very comfortable in my presence because I have that nurturing vibe. And so I think that's another element of loving dolls. I don't know if it's going to be the same thing for collecting anything, but I do think there, you are putting care into that product and into the way you display it or the way you keep it inside it stored, keep it stored away for, I don't know, a rainy day. I'm somebody who has to see everything in my collection, and when things are in storage, it means I'm either in the middle of selling or getting ready to sell. So I couldn't really speak personally on storage collectors, people who like to have it and then they like to, I guess they just feel like they don't even want it touching the air. But regardless, I do think that's their way of taking care of it. So I think as that's how I also see myself as domestic, as a collector, because I want to take care of my stuff and I want to care for it. And as you've seen, and I'm assuming if you've seen my other videos, you would have seen the way I care about my dolls. So yes, I think double green flags if you're ever dating a collector. And this is probably going to sound like a weird topic, a weird element to say that's like a good thing about or where value is in doll collecting. But I, as a doll collector, and I tell me if you feel the same way, it makes me more empathetic. It gives me empathy. And I'll tell you why. Anytime I find out somebody has a hobby or they are into something that kind of makes me raise an eyebrow, whether it's in judgment or just curiosity, but especially if it's in judgment, I have to go, wait a minute. Look around, Blaine. You have no right to judge anyone. And I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way. I mean that in a I should know better kind of way. People like different things, and when you're into something that people do kind of judge you for, or you feel like people might judge you for, because they might. That could be said about anything. That is the good, to me, that's the good side. It's like being on that side of judgment. I don't want to treat people the way they sometimes want to treat me over something that I just like it, and nothing you do is going to change that. So it always gives me that feeling of, oh yeah, I don't like cars, but I can understand why they would spend 6 hours a night working on their car or their motorcycle, because I do similarly with my dolls. I sit in my living room redressing them on camera, so I can't judge anyone because I can pretty much understand what it feels like to have a passion about something that's like something material. And I actually mentioned sports earlier because that is a very specific thing that I experienced growing up. I grew up in a hockey loving home, and they would lose their minds when their team would team would win, or sorry, when their team would lose, and they would lose their minds in another way, I guess, too, when they would win. And whenever it would just get too much, and I would feel like I need an adult, or I need to leave, I need to be somewhere else, I'd be like, you know what? I like weird things too. I behave weird over things that I love too. So that's where I really like that part about doll collecting, because there are times, I'm a human being, that I can judge people, and it keeps me in check. I think I've forgotten about the stigma element. Maybe it pops up here and there, because the next thing I want to talk about is also a very positive thing where there's value in doll collecting. I think for a lot of us, we get to express our creativity through dolls. And that can mean, and I keep saying dolls, but I do really mean all kinds of collectible, any toys or any adult made prop replicas, things like that. And I think it really taps into our creativity a lot of times, because whether it's setting up a display in a way that looks magical to us, or if it's specifically creative, as in, maybe you repaint your doll's faces, or you make them clothes, or you craft things for them. And it's a really healthy outlet. And again, it may cost some money, like everything else in life, but it is, to me, it's the most comforting way to express my creativity. And I'm sitting here with displays around me, so it may be obvious if you don't even know my other videos that what's been that's always been the main element of collecting for me, is putting up displays that make me feel home. You know what I mean? It's like dolls can become this mini world where you express yourself. And I'm probably making that sound creepier than I mean it, but it's just, as kids, we're taught to use any kind of toy or doll play is to teach kids to use their imagination. And it's seen as a good thing when you're a child. And I probably should have talked about that earlier, that one of the valuable things about dolls and their intention was to teach kids to be nurturing, to teach them how to take care of things. And like I said, imagination, they can create these special magical worlds where there's comfort. And I keep saying it in this little part, but it's creativity. And that's a big part of how I express mine as an adult, because we don't always have a lot of avenues to do that once we get into the 9 to 5. And it bears repeating that as long as you're not harming anyone and you're getting your bills paid, there's nothing to be ashamed of in any of these things. So even though I make jokes that things are creepy, or I'm making almost like judgment calls, it's really not that. It's just saying even with that being a potential possibility, there's nothing to be ashamed of, just because these are all positive things, and as long as you're not harming anyone, you're fine. especially not harming your budget. Now, the biggest joy I get from collecting, and I would imagine most, if not all, collectors feel the same way, it's escape. It's an escape from, I already mentioned, the 9 to 5. It's escape from boredom, or just things being too serious. Hard times are hard. So right now is probably a particular time in history when people would be really, really in need of having that escape. And it could be collecting anything: stamps, shoes, designer bags. And as long as you have the means and that's what brings you joy, then there's nothing wrong with that. And so the escape for me is, as I already said, creating this little mini world that I could sit in. Because what I didn't mention is, as a child, I was able to play with dolls and have my dolls, but because I shared a room with my older brother, I wasn't able to display anything, because he, being older than I am, he had he staked the claim in all of our shelf space. So it was all trophies and sports stuff. And so as an adult, this is the escape. It's escape slash nostalgia, which I think is always something adults are going to look for. Most adults. Maybe it's non-parents. I don't know. I'm not a parent, so I'm just going to assume here, but maybe parents too. And so that can mean the escape could be your healing your inner child. You had this doll that you wanted so badly as a kid, and you never got it because you weren't allowed or you couldn't afford it. And so as an adult, it becomes this mission, and it just grounds you and it makes you feel, like I said, healing that inner child, or just making up for what you couldn't have when you weren't in control of your own finances. And I think that's why doll and toy collecting is like specifically such a huge industry for adults, because it is able to connect us with a simpler time before we had to think about these. It's not that I hate my job or hate adulting or whatever they say, but it is just something that no matter what, I've always enjoyed being young at heart, or being in touch with my feminine side, if that's what it means. It's just whatever it is about doll collecting and toy collecting in general, that's always brought me back to earth, and just something that can relax me after. Because even though I don't hate my job, and I hope nobody out there, I know people do, that's not what I should say, but even if you don't hate your job, it's not like we work because, well, that's not true for everyone, but regardless, we have bills to pay, so that's why we're doing it. So if one of those bills that we pay is something that makes us feel really relaxed and excited and joyful, then that is the best kind of escape that anything could bring you. Honestly, I could go on and on about the value of doll collecting. And so this may be a topic that I revisit in the future. I know that this isn't my normal format, but the truth is I want to do videos every once in a while where I'm just sitting here focusing on what I'm talking about, rather than dressing dolls or opening a package. And so this is something that hopefully some of you are okay with. I know many of you throw on my videos in the background as you do other things, and so this might be ideal for that, because I'm literally just sitting here. And so I know that those of you will be okay with it. And to everyone else who made it this far, thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you soon in the next one.